Psychoanalysis is a type of therapy that aims to release repressed emotions and memories in order to help the person find some healing. In other words, psychoanalysis allows us to bring what exists at the unconscious or subconscious level up to our consciousness. The founder was Sigmund Freud, who had spent most of his life in Vienna, Austria. Here, he entered medical school and trained to become a neurologist, earning a medical degree in 1881. His model of the mind includes three major layers. The first is consciousness. This is where our current thoughts, feelings, and focus live. The second is preconsciousness or subconsciousness. This is the home of everything we can recall or retrieve from our memory. And lastly, we have our unconsciousness, the deepest level of our minds, or the repository of processes that drive our behavior, including primitive and instinctual desires dwell. Freud posited three metaphorical parts to the mind. The first is the id, which lives in the unconscious level and focuses solely on instinctual drives and desires. Freud imagined two forces in the id. The first, eros, or the instinct to survive, and that drives us to engage in life-sustaining activities, including our sex drives. And then the death instinct, which would later be called thanatos, and this is our drive to destroy, be aggressive, and violent. Next comes the ego, which acts as a conduit and a check for the id, working to meet the id's needs in socially appropriate ways. Last is the superego, and this is the portion of the mind in which morality and higher principles reside. It is what's considered possible from social and moral acceptable ways. Along with his models of the mind, Freud is famous for his interpretation of dreams. Freud believed that the dreams were significant and that by analyzing one's dreams, you can get valuable insight into the unconscious mind. In 1900, he published The Interpretation of Dreams, which outlined his hypothesis and his primary purpose for working with dreams to provide individuals with wish fulfillment and allowing them to work through some of their repressed issues in a situation free from consciousness and the constraints of reality. Highly influenced by Freud's theories, Salvador Dali, a Spanish surrealist painter and printmaker, was known for exploring subconscious imagery. Arguably, his most famous painting is The Persistence of Memory, painted in 1931, which depicts limp, melting watches. Dali used what he called the paranoid critical method, a mental exercise of accessing the subconscious to enhance artistic creativity. It was this that influenced Dali's work, with his fascination of both modern science and dreams, and creating a use of symbolism and intellectual insight, making him one of the finest and most famous contemporary artists of the 20th century. Salvador Dali had been trying to meet Freud for quite some time. Like many of the surrealists, he revered psychoanalysis for the radical new light it shed on the life of the mind. And as a student in Madrid, he had immersed himself in Freud's writings. When he first met Freud, it was rather bizarre. They met on July 19th, 1938, at Freud's home in London, where he had arrived just a few weeks earlier as a refugee from Nazi-occupied Vienna. By the time of their meeting, both Freud and Dali had gained widespread recognition. Freud was rather suspicious of the surrealists. Freud's tastes were rather conservative when it came to art. He was an admirer of the old masters and really had little time for the avant-garde movements that were emerging in his own lifetime. Because of this, he was wary of Dali. When Dali met Freud, he brought with him his latest painting, The Metamorphosis of Narcissus. In it, Dali depicts the Greek myth of Narcissus, the beautiful hunter who falls in love with his own reflection in a pool. Freud also had been dealing with the myth of Narcissus and developed the idea of narcissism, or in other words, a person who is solely focused on themselves. Dali here was then playing on Freud's ideas and creating double images, which are key features of his critical paranoia, which we can see here in the painting. Though initially Dali thought their meeting was a failure, later Freud would say that he was grateful for the meeting and that he was interested in the way Dali was approaching his undeniable mastery of the arts. And Freud then reconsidered his opinion on the Surrealists. Dali, like most of the Surrealists, were highly influenced by Freud's psychoanalytical theory of personality, which maintains that human behavior is a result of the interactions among three component elements of the mind: the id, ego, and superego. Many of Dali's masterpieces reflect a surreal, unconscious, and dreamlike quality, such as the persistence of memory, in which the message is our subliminal unconscious mind is present in what we do in our daily lives and has more power over us than that of other things in the subconscious world. We can interpret many of Dali's works, extensive as they are, through the lens of Freud's psychology, specifically the fixation on complexes and psychosexual development. From its inception, Surrealism was closely involved with contemporary developments in psychology and psychoanalysis. The unconscious was a creative source, and for the Surrealists, it revealed the individual artist's psychological history. Unlike Freud, the Surrealists had no interest in the therapeutic potential of those theories. They were interested in the unconscious as a way to express themselves and not in the possibility of healing neurosis. Furthermore, the Surrealists celebrated insanity as a form of mental liberation, and they often published illustrations from objects made by patients in mental hospitals. They believed to cure the mentally ill was a mistake and was to make them conform to stifling social conventions. Not all Surrealist objects have immediately recognizable Freudian symbols, but their complex depths of feeling that these objects arouse in their finders and makers, and potentially in their viewers as well, indicate that their genesis is in the depths of the erotic unconscious.